For the past several years, many organizations and employers have been doing a little bit of a tightrope walk between supporting freedom of speech and also having this kind of orthodoxy of thought where anyone that spoke out against it or pushed back against it typically bumped into one of their favorite phrases of freedom of speech does not mean freedom from consequence. But in the wake of the Hamas attacks on Israel and some of the pro-Palestinian stances they've taken, they're now starting to meet some consequences that they're not necessarily comfortable with. And it's kind of interesting to see how people react and how strong their beliefs really are when push comes to shove. We got some examples. We're going to unpack it in a minute. Come right back. Hey folks, Mark here with The Rational Workforce. Thanks so much for tuning in. You know, in the wake of the terrorist attacks in Israel, there are so many different angles and so many different facets that can be discussed, and I think that we're going to be unpacking this for a generation. But sticking to the focus of this channel, we're going to cover it in a couple of areas. One is specifically around employees, employers, and unions. The other is around universities and upcoming college graduates and how their stances and their opinions could impact future employability. We've got a lot that we want to get into, so we're going to jump into it right away. And, you know, one of the first things I want to talk about is labor unions, right? So this is the website from a labor union called the Service Employee International Union. They represent about 2 million different workers. You can see here in healthcare, the public sector, and property services. And unions' role is ostensibly to support the rights and the needs of their constituents, of the members of their union, and to be able to look out for their best interest. It's a little hard to understand how taking a hardline stance on things going on in Israel, specifically siding with the Hamas organization, the Hamas terrorists, has anything to do with labor unions in the States, but here's the stand that they've taken. So this is a gentleman by the name of Cooper Caraway. He was the executive director of the SEIU in Connecticut, and he said at an anti-Israel rally in the wake of the attacks, "Our bosses, our government want us to think Hamas are enemies of working class people, but they are not. Our enemies are their CEOs. Our comrades are in Gaza," he added before denouncing capitalism, colonialism, and occupation. And again, as we said at the top of the video, freedom of speech, sure. Freedom from consequence, well, we'll see if there's any consequences that come out of this. Let's look at another one. So Starbucks Workers United is another large union group, obviously, as the title indicates, supporting Starbucks employees. And they issued this statement saying that Starbucks Workers United stands with Palestine. And again, kind of taking a side specifically that at least looks like they're lending support to the terrorists that attacked that concert in Israel and started the war that's still going on at the time of this recording. So as an employer or as a consumer, how do you feel about it? How do you think you should react to these things when you see the Starbucks brand attached to something like this? I think the natural inclination is to vote with your wallet, right? That's what we all do. We've seen it happen with Starbucks earlier this year. We've seen it happen with Bud Light. We're starting to see it happen with Disney. So, you know, that's one of the ways that we as individuals and as consumers can push back in a meaningful way against these stances and these policies that we don't believe in. And, you know, it's really interesting to see how things are starting to play out, how these organizations have felt so fiercely convicted to put out their statements in support of the terrorists and to make bold claims like that kind of crumble in the face of the consumer backlash and the power that we all have, not just as consumers, but also as workers, right? How would you feel if you were a Jewish member of one of these unions that are standing up for and supporting a nation whose or an organization whose stated goal is to eliminate you? How in the hell can you feel supported? I'm a Catholic. I'm not a member of a union. I can only empathize with it, but I can't imagine that there's any twisted form of mental gymnastics you can give that identifies that's somehow supporting all of your constituents. But let's see what happens when pressure is applied. So first of all, let's take a look at our SEIU folks. So the Connecticut union leader, the gentleman who made those comments about their enemies being CEOs, he resigned after his remarks. So the gentleman's name, Cooper Caraway, resigned Thursday as executive director of the SEIU Connecticut State Council after comments that made in an opinion article in the Wall Street Journal. That's what we just covered. On Thursday, the State Council announced that he had resigned effective immediately, and the union said it would not speak further about the resignation, but reissued a previous statement about the ongoing war in the Middle East. I think this second paragraph here is particularly important. The SEIU unequivocally condemns the horrific terrorist attack by Hamas that took place on October 7th and all violence against innocent civilians, no matter the background. That is a pretty bold and good statement to make, that they're condemning it, but it's a stark contrast to kind of what was originally put out there. You have to wonder if they would have this much of a full-throated and definitive statement condemning Hamas if they did not receive pushback. Let's also take a look at what's going on with Starbucks. So now Starbucks corporate is threatening to sue the union that expressed support for Palestine over Israel. So in an acknowledgement that an effort to boycott Starbucks is having an impact, the giant coffee chain has issued a cease and desist letter to a union representing about 9,000 of its baristas and other workers who have publicly sided with Palestinians after Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th. So, again, there's a couple of examples where freedom of speech doesn't mean freedom of consequence. The consequences are coming, and that is a testament to the power of workers who oppose the views of these organizations that ostensibly represent them, but more importantly, those who have the economic power to be able to say, I'm not going to patronize your company with my hard-earned dollars because of the views you express. I don't want to fund organizations that have those views. This is the waking up that I think is very needed and has been a long time coming, at least here in the United States, in pushing back against some of these corporations and organizations that have had the bully pulpit for quite some time. Now, let's kind of move from the world of employers and employees, and let's take a look at what's going on some of the campuses around the country. This is from Newsweek. This is a little bit old. It's a couple weeks old, but here's a list of universities staging pro-Palestinian protests, right? So you have at Harvard, more than 30 student groups at Harvard signed a statement blaming Israel for the violence. You've got schools like Indiana University, Arizona State, California State University, Long Beach, UNC Chapel Hill. This is, I believe, at this stage of the game, a pretty incomplete list. And again, like, college campuses should be places where students and places where individuals can express differing ideas and have open discussions and open debates. Yet so many of these campuses have either forbidden any organizations that may be even centrist or centrist right from having discussions, from opening these debates, from opening minds to having different viewpoints. Yet when it comes to something like staging protests or rallies that are supporting terrorist organizations, it seems to be some relatively free reign. But let's take a look at, again, how the consequences are, right? So this is from the Financial Times. U.S. universities lose millions as donors pull funding over a Hamas stance. The article goes on to talk about how these wealthy alumni and benefactors and donors are now starting to really pull back those dollars and say, look, I'm no longer going to support you financially. I'm no longer going to have an open checkbook for what you need as a university from an endowment standpoint or contributions because of your stances. And again, it's really interesting to see how organizations are reacting in the wake of some of these types of things. So here's another interesting piece. Harvard students scrambled to take back support for letter attacking Israel as some CEOs look to blacklist them. Again, you're putting yourself out there. You're signing a letter in support of a terrorist organization. or at the very least, that is citing that the victims are actually the perpetrators. As an employer, you should have every right to make a judgment call on whether you want someone with that philosophy or that type of thinking to represent your company. Yet now that we're starting to see organizations push back against it and use their voice and use their hiring ability to make a statement, suddenly these students want to walk back those statements. So, it's such a fascinating phenomenon that we're seeing right now, where these organizations that, again, have just stood on this bully pulpit of, moral certitude and human rights, and, how using the wrong word or the wrong piece of language is viewed as violence, or what was the other term? Silence is violence on some issues, right? But now in the face of true atrocities, and if they're really this deeply rooted in their belief that Israel is at fault, it's incredible how a little bit of economic power and a little bit of voicing an opposition or threatening livelihoods makes them rethink those positions. Now, do I really believe that they're having a change of heart? No. It just means that they're probably not as willing to be vocal about it. They'll harbor the same beliefs, but they'll keep it under wraps. Say what you will about that, but this is a really important lesson for each of us as consumers and each of us as employees to be very discerning about the organizations we support, the organizations that we go to work for, and really for the folks that are voting with their wallets, and for the organizations that are speaking up and taking stands against it. Good. It's time you start listening to the broader population on topics like this. What do you think? Would love to hear your thoughts. Please leave a note in the comments below. Let us know what you think. Let us know if there's other stuff or other angles that you'd like us to consider on this. Again, I'm just kind of using the publications and using the media to reflect back what we're seeing happen in the marketplace. If you have any other venues you'd like me to explore, let me know. If you like what you saw, ring the bell, click subscribe, click like, do all the things that will help us grow. We really appreciate it. And we're going to sign off for now. We will catch you on the next one. Thanks for tuning in. Bye, folks.